Close your eyes for a moment, just for one breath. Breathe in slowly and breathe out. Now I want to ask you something. When was the last time you sat in complete silence and felt truly at peace? Not the silence of exhaustion, not the quiet of distraction, but real peace, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside you, the kind that does not need anything from the outside world to feel whole. If you are struggling to remember, you are not alone. Billions of people on this planet wake up every single morning already overwhelmed. Before their feet even touch the floor, the mind has already begun its relentless performance, the mental rehearsal of worries, the replaying of old conversations, the anxiety about tomorrow, the regret about yesterday. We have become so fluent in suffering that we no longer even notice we are doing it. Suffering has become our native language. But more than 2,500 years ago, a man sat beneath a fig tree in northern India, and he refused to move until he understood exactly why human beings suffer, and more importantly, how they could stop. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and what he discovered in the stillness beneath that tree did not just change his life, it changed the entire course of human civilization. What he found was not a religion in the way most of us think of religion. It was not a list of commandments handed down from the sky. It was not a demand for obedience or a set of rituals designed to appease some invisible force. What he found was a map, a precise, detailed, breathtakingly honest map of the human mind. A map that showed exactly how we create our own suffering and exactly how we can find our way out. Today, that wisdom has never been more urgently needed. We live in the most technologically advanced period in all of human history. We have more access to information, entertainment, comfort, and convenience than any civilization that has ever existed. And yet the rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and existential despair are at historic highs. We are drowning in distraction and starving for meaning. We have everything the world has to offer, and so many of us still feel like something essential is missing. The Buddha saw this coming, not because he was a prophet, but because he understood something about the structure of the human mind that most of us have never been taught. He understood that our suffering is not caused by our circumstances, it is caused by how we relate to our circumstances. And that distinction, that single, seemingly simple distinction, is the beginning of everything. In the next few minutes, we are going to walk together through 7 of the most powerful lessons that the Buddha left behind. These are not casual observations. These are the distilled insights of a lifetime of practice, refined through centuries of extraordinary minds who dedicated their entire existence to understanding what it means to be human and how to live with wisdom, compassion, and genuine peace. Some of these lessons will feel familiar. Some of them will feel uncomfortable. Some of them will arrive like a key turning in a lock you did not even know was closed. But all of them, if you truly hear them, not just intellectually understand them, but actually feel them landing in your body, all of them have the power to fundamentally alter the way you experience your life. So settle in, breathe, and let us begin. 1. The truth about suffering that nobody wants to hear. The very first teaching the Buddha gave after his enlightenment is called the First Noble Truth. And it is, on the surface, the most pessimistic-sounding thing you will ever hear in a spiritual teaching. The First Noble Truth is simply this: life involves suffering. In the ancient Pali language, the Buddha used the word dukkha, and while suffering is the most common translation, dukkha actually carries a much richer and more precise meaning. The original metaphor comes from a wheel. Imagine an ox cart wheel that has been slightly misaligned on its axle. Every time that wheel turns, there is a subtle but persistent grinding, a friction, a wrongness, an unsettledness. Dukkha is that. It is not just the catastrophic suffering of loss or illness or grief. It is also the low hum of unease that runs beneath ordinary life. The restlessness that keeps you scrolling your phone at midnight, the vague dissatisfaction that shows up even on your good days, the sense that something somewhere is slightly off. Now, the Buddha was not being nihilistic. He was not saying that life is nothing but misery and that happiness is impossible. He was saying something much more precise than that. He was saying that as long as we approach life with certain fundamental misunderstandings about its nature, suffering will be the natural result. It is not a punishment. It is not random. It is the predictable outcome of a particular way of relating to reality. Here is what I want you to really sit with. Most of us spend our entire lives trying to eliminate suffering by changing our external circumstances. We believe with tremendous conviction that if we could just get the right job, find the right relationship, accumulate the right amount of money, achieve the right level of status, or live in the right place, then finally, we would feel okay. We would feel at peace. We would feel enough. And the remarkable, uncomfortable thing is that even when we get those things, even when we actually achieve the dream we spent years chasing, the sense of okayness lasts for a little while, and then it fades, and we find ourselves looking for the next thing. This is not weakness or ingratitude. It is the nature of the mind that has not yet understood dukkha. It is the nature of a mind that is still grinding on a misaligned axle. The Buddha is inviting us to stop, not to stop striving for beautiful things, but to stop believing that any external achievement or acquisition will permanently resolve the inner restlessness. That restlessness has a different source, and until we go to that source, we are rearranging furniture in a house whose foundations are cracked. There is a kind of relief that comes with truly accepting the first noble truth. Because when you stop expecting life to be free of difficulty, when you stop experiencing every moment of hardship as a personal failure or a cosmic injustice, something relaxes. You stop fighting reality, and in that stopping, paradoxically, the suffering begins to ease. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to honestly look at. The Buddha's first teaching is an invitation to look honestly, to see clearly, and that clear seeing, as uncomfortable as it initially feels, is where liberation begins. The root of suffering, the Buddha taught, lies not in the difficulties of life themselves, but in our craving and our aversion. We suffer because we want things to be different from how they are. We suffer because we cling to what we love and push away what we fear. And until we understand the mechanics of that clinging and that pushing, we will keep spinning. The first noble truth is not despair, it is diagnosis, and an accurate diagnosis, however sobering, is the very first step toward healing. Let us think about this in the context of your own life right now. Is there something you are clinging to? Something you are desperate not to lose? A relationship? A self-image? A belief about how things should be going? A version of your future that you have planned in your mind with such precision that any deviation from it feels like catastrophe? That clinging, the Buddha would say, is where your suffering is being manufactured, not in the thing itself, in the holding. And is there something you are pushing away? Something you refuse to look at, refuse to feel, refuse to acknowledge because the thought of facing it is simply too painful? That aversion is also a form of suffering. Running from the wolf does not make it disappear. It only means you spend your life running. The invitation of the first noble truth is revolutionary in its simplicity. Stop running, stop clinging. Look at what is actually here. And when you can do that, even for a moment, you discover something astonishing. The present moment, met with honesty and without resistance, is always workable. It is always bearable. It is only our story about it that makes it feel otherwise. Think of someone you admire for their extraordinary resilience. Think of the people you have encountered, perhaps in books, perhaps in life, who went through devastating circumstances, loss, illness, poverty, injustice, and who emerged not broken, but somehow more luminous. What do those people have in common? Almost universally, what they share is the capacity to meet what is, without the additional weight of what should not be. They have understood, whether they would call it Buddhist or not, the fundamental teaching of the first noble truth. Life involves suffering. That is not the enemy of a good life. It is part of the texture of all life. And when you stop treating it as an enemy, you stop being at war with reality itself. This is not resignation. This is not giving up. The Buddha's path is one of the most demanding things a human being can attempt, but the effort is directed inward, toward understanding and transformation, rather than outward, toward the endless rearrangement of circumstances. That shift in direction changes everything. 2. You are not who you think you are. Of all the teachings in the entire Buddhist canon, this one is perhaps the most radical. It is also the one that, when it truly lands, produces the most profound and lasting sense of freedom. The teaching is this: the self that you believe yourself to be, the consistent, continuous, fixed entity that you refer to when you say I or me or mine, that self is not what you think it is. The Buddha called this teaching anatta, which is translated as non-self or no self. And I want to be careful here, because this teaching is consistently misunderstood, and when it is misunderstood, it seems to lead to a kind of nihilism, a sense that nothing matters, that you do not exist, that there is no point to anything. That is not what the Buddha was saying, not remotely. What he was saying was far more specific and far more liberating. He was saying that the self is not a fixed thing. It is not a solid, permanent, unchanging entity sitting behind your eyes like a little emperor in a throne room, watching the world go by and making decisions. That image of the self, the one most of us carry around without ever examining it, is a construction. It is a story the mind tells itself, moment by moment, weaving together memories, sensations, thoughts, and preferences into a narrative of continuity that feels real, but is actually much more fluid and impermanent than we imagine. Let us look at this carefully and honestly. Who were you when you were 7 years old? What did you believe? What did you love? What were you afraid of? What did you want more than anything? Now ask yourself honestly, is that the same person sitting here right now? You share a name, you share a body that has been maintained through continuous biological processes, but your beliefs, your fears, your values, your desires, they have changed, perhaps radically. The person you were at 7 would likely not recognize who you are today. So which one is the real you? Or think about this. Who are you at work versus who you are with your closest friend, versus who you are with your parents, versus who you are alone at 2 in the morning when no one is watching? Are you the same person in all of those contexts? Most people, if they are honest, will recognize that they shift, that different qualities, different voices, different ways of being emerge in different contexts. So which version is the real one? The Buddha's answer is that they all are, and none of them exclusively is. What we call the self is more like a river than a rock. A river has a name, has a recognizable character, has a direction and a quality that we can describe and map. But it is never the same water twice. It is always moving, always changing, always being shaped by everything it encounters. And trying to freeze a river, trying to hold it still, trying to insist that it must always look exactly as it looks right now, that is how we create suffering. Here is where this teaching becomes immediately practical. Think about how much of your suffering comes from the defense of a particular self-image. Think about the last time you felt deeply hurt, truly wounded, not physically, but in your sense of self. Somebody criticized you, somebody dismissed you, somebody did not treat you the way you believed you deserved to be treated. And it hurt, not just a little, but in that deep, hot, almost unbearable way. Why? Because there was a fixed image of who you are, who you should be recognized as, how you deserve to be seen, and that image was threatened. The pain was not about the external event. The pain was about the rigidity of the self that was protecting itself. Now, the Buddha is not saying that you should not have values. He is not saying that you should allow people to walk all over you. What he is saying is that when the sense of self is held lightly, when you understand that who you are is fluid and evolving and not threatened by a difficult moment, the suffering that comes from that defensiveness dissolves. You can engage with conflict, with criticism, with difficulty, without it feeling like an existential threat, because your existence is not at stake. There is something else here that deserves careful attention. When we identify very strongly with a fixed sense of self, we also create very rigid divisions between that self and everything else. Us and them, me and you, in here and out there. And from those rigid divisions comes so much of the hatred, the tribalism, the cruelty, and the violence that human beings inflict upon one another. Because the more solid and defended your own self feels, the more threatening other selves appear, and the more threatening they appear, the more justified aggression and dismissal and dehumanization can seem. The teaching of anatta, of non-self, is not just about your personal liberation. It is about your relationship to all of life. When the boundaries of the self become more permeable, when you begin to see yourself not as a separate fortress, but as a temporary fluid expression of a vast, interconnected process, the natural response is not nihilism, it is compassion. When you understand that every person you encounter is also a temporary, fluid, suffering, striving expression of that same vast process, you cannot help but feel a fundamental kinship with them, even the ones who have hurt you, even the ones whose views offend you, even the ones you have spent years defining yourself in opposition to. The great Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa spoke of what he called egolessness, not the absence of a functioning sense of self, but the absence of the rigid, defended, isolated ego that is constantly at war with the world around it. Egolessness is not weakness. It is actually extraordinary strength, because you no longer spend all your energy defending a position. You are free to be fully present. You are free to respond to what is actually happening, rather than what your ego thinks is happening. Try this tonight, as a simple experiment. The next time you notice yourself becoming defensive, the next time you feel that hot, clenching sensation that comes when your self-image feels threatened, instead of reacting, just pause and ask yourself, who is being threatened here? Can you find that self? Can you locate it precisely? If you are completely honest, you will find that what you are protecting is not a thing but a story. And stories, unlike rocks, can be gently set down. 3. Everything changes, and that is the point. Why some people do sa blessing to putu. The Buddha taught 3 marks of existence, 3 fundamental characteristics that apply to absolutely everything in the phenomenal world, without exception. We have already touched on non-self. The second mark is impermanence, which the Buddha called anicca. And while everyone nods along when they first hear this teaching, yes, yes, everything changes, we all know that. The actual, visceral, lived experience of impermanence is one of the most transformative and terrifying things a human being can encounter. Because here is the truth. We know intellectually that everything changes, and we spend almost every waking moment of our lives acting as though it does not. We know our bodies are aging, and we do not think about it until something forces us to. We know relationships change, and we are still shocked when they do. We know that feelings pass, and yet when we are in the grip of a dark mood, it feels permanent and immovable, as though it has always been this way and always will be. We know that circumstances shift, and yet we build our entire sense of security on the assumption that what we have today will still be there tomorrow. The gap between our intellectual understanding of impermanence and our lived relationship with it is the source of extraordinary suffering. Let me tell you something that might initially seem counterintuitive. The reason impermanence is so painful is not impermanence itself. Impermanence is simply the nature of reality. The reason impermanence is so painful is our resistance to it, our clinging to what we want to remain, our desperate, exhausting insistence that this moment, this feeling, this person, this version of my life should stay exactly as it is forever. A flower does not mourn its own petals falling. The autumn tree does not grieve the leaves it releases. They move in perfect alignment with the nature of things. We are the ones who stand in the stream and try to hold the water in place and then wonder why we are so tired and so wet. Now I want to say something important here, because this teaching is often misused in a way that causes harm. Accepting impermanence is not the same as not caring. It is not the same as detachment in the cold, unfeeling sense. It is not an excuse to not be present with those you love, or to not grieve when you lose them, or to not be moved by beauty. In fact, it is precisely the opposite. When you truly make peace with impermanence, when you genuinely accept that this moment will not last, that this person will not be here forever, that this beauty will fade, you become more present with it, not less. You love more fully. You pay attention more completely. You waste less time on petty conflicts and small resentments because you genuinely know, that time is not infinite. There is a practice in some Buddhist traditions of meditating on death, not in a morbid, self-destructive way, but with genuine curiosity and openness. The contemplation of your own mortality, of the fact that one day, not so very far from now in the scale of cosmic time, you will no longer be here, is considered one of the most powerful catalysts for living well. Because when you hold death in your awareness, not as an abstraction but as an actual truth, the question of how you are spending your time becomes urgent in the very best way. What am I doing with this irreplaceable life? What am I putting off? Who am I not calling? What am I not saying? What fear am I allowing to keep me small? Impermanence cuts through procrastination like nothing else. Not because it fills you with anxiety about the future, but because it returns you fully and completely to the present. And the present, as the Buddha saw so clearly, is the only place where life is actually happening. The past is memory, the future is imagination. Only this moment is real. And this moment, this breath, this sensation, this heartbeat, is already, even as you experience it, dissolving into the next. There is also something deeply liberating about impermanence when you apply it not just to the things you love, but to the things you fear. If everything changes, then suffering also changes. The pain that feels unbearable today will not feel exactly like this forever. The darkness that seems to have no end has in fact an end. Every storm passes, every winter eventually breaks. Not always in the way we want it to, not always on the timeline we would choose, but nothing stays exactly as it is. That is not a platitude. That is the nature of reality itself. And there is something even more profound here. If impermanence is the nature of all things, and it is, then the solid, fixed, threatening problems that seem to loom over our lives are also impermanent. The illness, the financial crisis, the broken relationship, the lost career, these are real, they are painful, they deserve to be taken seriously, but they are not permanent, they will transform. And your capacity to meet them with something other than panic or despair depends entirely on how deeply you have internalized this truth. Think about the hardest thing you have ever gone through, the worst period of your life, the moment when things seemed most impossible. Are you still in it exactly as you were then? Or did something shift? Did something change? I would guess that something did, even if the circumstances are not fully resolved. The texture of the experience changed. Your relationship to it changed. Time moved, as time always moves, and moved things with it. This is what the teaching of impermanence is trying to tell you. Not that nothing matters, but that your relationship to what matters, held lightly, with understanding and acceptance, is what determines the quality of your experience. Grip the flower too tightly and you crush it. Hold it too loosely and you lose it. The art of living with impermanence is the art of that middle way, engaged, present, loving, and at the same time fundamentally at peace with the nature of things. 4. The mind is everything. There is a verse that opens one of the most ancient Buddhist texts, the Dhammapada, and it reads, in its most direct translation, like this: "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." These words have been quoted so many times that they have almost become a cliché. But I want to invite you to step past the familiarity of them and feel what they are actually saying. Because if these words are true, and the entire edifice of Buddhist psychology rests on the claim that they are, then they represent the most radical possible statement about the nature of human experience. They are saying that the world you live in is not primarily out there, it is in here. It is being created, moment by moment, by the activity of your own mind. This is not idealism in the philosophical sense. The Buddha was not saying that external reality does not exist, or that the material world is an illusion. He was saying something much more precise and much more applicable to daily life. He was saying that your experience of reality, what you perceive, how you interpret it, how it feels, what it means, is shaped almost entirely by the mental patterns, the habitual ways of thinking, the ingrained assumptions and interpretations that the mind brings to every moment. Two people can go through exactly the same external event and have completely different experiences of it. A sudden and unexpected change at work, for example. One person experiences it as catastrophic, as a threat to their identity and security, as evidence that the world is hostile and uncontrollable. Another person experiences it as an opportunity, as a catalyst for growth, as information rather than indictment. The external event is identical. The experience is completely different, because experience is not determined by what happens. It is determined by the mind that meets what happens. The Buddha spent decades mapping the terrain of the human mind with extraordinary precision. He identified specific patterns of thinking and perception. He called them mental formations that reliably produce suffering, and he identified other patterns that reliably produce clarity, compassion, and peace. The good news, and this is genuinely extraordinary news, is that these patterns are not fixed. They are not hardwired. They are not determined by genetics or childhood or circumstance in any absolute way. They can be changed. They can be trained. The mind, the Buddha discovered, is fundamentally workable. This is the foundational insight behind what is now called mindfulness meditation. When you sit and watch your mind, when you observe, with patient curiosity, the thoughts that arise, the emotions that move through, the reactions that happen seemingly on automatic, you begin to see the patterns, you begin to see the loops. You begin to notice that certain kinds of thoughts reliably trigger certain kinds of emotional states, which reliably trigger certain kinds of behaviors, which reliably produce certain kinds of outcomes. And once you can see the loop, you can begin to work with it. This is not about positive thinking in the shallow, denial-based sense. The Buddha was not recommending that you pretend difficult things are not difficult, or that you plaster a smile over genuine pain. In fact, the entire tradition is built on radical honesty about what is actually present. What mindfulness offers is something far more powerful than positive thinking. It offers the capacity to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them, to see a mental pattern arising without being swept away by it, to create just enough space between stimulus and response that choice becomes possible. Think about the habitual thought patterns in your own life. The stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve and what is possible for you. The narratives about other people, the ones you have decided are your enemies or your rivals or the causes of your suffering. The assumptions you carry about the world, that it is fundamentally safe or fundamentally dangerous, fundamentally abundant or fundamentally scarce, fundamentally fair or fundamentally cruel. Where did those stories come from? Did you choose them deliberately, after careful reflection, or did they form, largely unconsciously, from a combination of childhood experiences, cultural messages, and the accumulated interpretations of a mind that was doing its best to make sense of a confusing world? The practice the Buddha is pointing to is not about replacing bad stories with good stories, though that is sometimes a useful step. It is about recognizing the nature of story itself, about seeing that what we take to be reality is almost always a highly edited, heavily filtered interpretation of reality, and that interpretation, that editorial process, happens in the mind, and the mind can learn to do it differently. There is a particular teaching in Tibetan Buddhism about what is called the monkey mind. The mind, this teaching suggests, is like a monkey jumping from branch to branch, restless, reactive, grabbing at this thought and then that one, never still, never truly at rest. Most of us live our entire lives inside that monkey's frantic jumping, believing that the jumping is us, that the noise is us, that the constant activity is all there is. Meditation, sitting still and watching, reveals that beneath the monkey's motion there is something else, a quality of awareness that is not itself a thought, a spaciousness in which thoughts arise and pass, a stillness at the center of all the movement. The Buddha called this quality of awareness by many names: presence, awareness, Rigpa in the Tibetan tradition, the witnessing consciousness, and the extraordinary discovery made not just by the Buddha, but by every sincere practitioner who has followed this path, is that this witnessing awareness is not a product of thinking. It cannot be reached by thinking harder. It can only be encountered in the gap between thoughts, in the silence beneath the noise. And what practitioners consistently report from that encounter is not nothing. It is not blankness. What they report is a profound, natural, unconditional sense of okayness, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a quality of being that is, as the Buddha said, already whole, already free, already, in some sense that transcends ordinary categories, sufficient. The mind is everything, not because the world outside does not exist, but because your relationship to that world, your experience of it, your capacity to navigate it with wisdom and compassion and grace, all of that is born in the mind, and the mind can be trained. That is the most hopeful teaching of all. 5. The radical practice of compassion. If you were to distill the entire ethical dimension of Buddhism into a single word, that word would be compassion. In Sanskrit, karuna, the capacity to be present with suffering, your own and others, without turning away, without hardening, without collapsing, with open eyes and an open heart. But I want to be very precise here, because compassion in the Buddhist sense is frequently confused with something else. It is confused with pity, which looks down at suffering from a distance. It is confused with sentimentality, which feels temporarily moved but changes nothing. It is confused with martyrdom, which submerges itself in others' pain at the cost of its own well-being. Buddhist compassion is none of these things. It is something harder and more luminous. The Pali word for compassion, karuna, comes from a root that means to tremble, to be moved, to feel the vibration of another's pain in your own being, not to observe it from behind glass, but to genuinely feel the contact of it, and simultaneously not to be destroyed by that contact, to remain present, clear, and capable of actually helping. This is what the tradition calls equanimity paired with compassion, the strength that allows you to open fully to suffering without being overwhelmed by it. This teaching begins always with yourself, and this is where most people in the West get stuck, because we have been so deeply conditioned to believe that self-compassion is selfishness, that caring for yourself is an indulgence, that the pain you carry is your fault and therefore not deserving of tenderness. The Buddha saw this as a profound misunderstanding. He saw it, in fact, as a form of violence, the violence of the inner critic, the cruelty of the mind that turns on itself in moments of failure or weakness. There is a famous saying, often attributed to Buddhist circles: "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." And the reason this is not indulgence, the reason this is actually the foundation of genuine compassion for others, is this: you cannot give what you do not have. A person who treats themselves with contempt and cruelty will, no matter how sincere their intentions, find that contempt and cruelty leaking into their relationship with others. We see it all around us. The harshest critics of others are almost always the harshest critics of themselves. The most rigid and unforgiving people toward others are almost always operating from a place of profound self-rejection. Self-compassion is not the enemy of growth or accountability. It is actually the ground from which genuine growth becomes possible. When you make a mistake, and you will, you are human. The question the Buddha's teaching raises is, What is the most useful response? Brutal self-attack? The internal flogging that many of us were trained to believe is the appropriate response to failure? Or something else? A clear, honest acknowledgement of what happened, a genuine understanding of what led to it, a sincere commitment to learning and doing differently, and through all of that, a fundamental warmth toward the human being who is in the process of learning. Which of those two approaches do you think actually produces better outcomes over time? Which one allows genuine transformation? Now extend this same compassion outward. And here is where the Buddha's teaching becomes truly challenging, because the invitation is not limited to the people you like. It is not limited to the people whose suffering is easy to feel. The invitation, the demanding, confrontational, beautiful invitation, is to extend genuine compassion to everyone, including the people who have hurt you, including the people whose views you find repugnant, including the people you do not understand and perhaps do not want to understand. This is where the intellectual understanding of non-self becomes emotionally real, because when you genuinely begin to see that every person causing harm is doing so from their own place of unacknowledged suffering, from their own unexamined wounds, from their own limited and distorted relationship with reality, when you can see that clearly, something shifts. It does not mean you approve of what they are doing. It does not mean you do not take steps to protect yourself or others, but the burning personal hatred, the conviction that some people are simply evil and deserve suffering, that becomes harder to sustain. Because hatred, the Buddha observed with great precision, is never an answer to suffering. It is always a continuation of it. There is a practice in the Tibetan tradition called Tonglen, which translates as giving and taking. In this practice, you breathe in the suffering of others, literally visualize it, feel it, receive it, and breathe out relief, healing, space, freedom. You take on what others are burdened by and offer them what they need. It sounds, described plainly, like it might make you feel worse. And in the beginning it is uncomfortable, because we are so trained to protect ourselves from the pain of the world. But practitioners report something surprising. What they find, when they stop trying to insulate themselves from others' pain, is that the pain becomes manageable, that the act of opening to it, rather than armoring against it, actually produces less suffering, not more. Because here is what the Buddha understood about compassion that is not widely understood. Compassion is not a drain on your resources. Practiced genuinely, it is the source of your deepest energy. The people who are most sustainably, most durably motivated, not the ones who burn hot and fast and flame out, but the ones who do the patient, long work over decades, are almost invariably motivated not by ambition or fear or the desire for personal gain, but by genuine care, by love in the most expanded sense of that word, by the compassionate recognition that others are suffering and that there is something they can offer. Compassion is not soft, it is not naive, it is not the territory of people who cannot handle the hardness of the world. In the Buddhist tradition, compassion is paired always with wisdom, with the clear-eyed understanding of how things actually are. Wisdom without compassion becomes cold and clinical. Compassion without wisdom becomes sentimental and ineffective. Together, they constitute what the tradition calls the two wings of enlightenment. Without both, you cannot fly. 6. The power of this moment and the illusion of time. There is a question the Buddha asked, which I want to put to you directly right now. Where are you? Not in the geographic sense. I mean, where, in your own experience, are you actually living right now? Are you here, in this moment, fully present to what is happening right now? Or are you somewhere else, reliving something from yesterday, last week, last year, last decade, rehearsing something that might happen tomorrow, next month, in some imagined future that may or may not ever arrive? If you are like most human beings, the honest answer is that you spend the vast majority of your conscious life somewhere other than the present moment. The mind is extraordinary at time travel. It loops backwards into memory and forward into anticipation with such facility, such seamlessness that we rarely notice how seldom we are actually here. And the Buddha saw with the clarity of direct experience that this chronic absence from the present is not a minor quirk of human cognition. It is the central mechanism of suffering. Let me explain why. The past, as it exists in your mind, is not actually the past. It is a memory of the past. And memory, as neuroscience has now confirmed in remarkable detail, is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Every time you access a memory, you alter it slightly. You color it with your current emotional state. You fill in gaps with interpretation. You emphasize certain details and diminish others. The past you are living in, the past that is causing you pain or nostalgia or regret or pride, that past is a story, a vivid, convincing, emotionally charged story, but a story nonetheless. The future, similarly, is not the future. It is a projection, a mental model built from past experiences, current fears and hopes, and the mind's extraordinary capacity to extrapolate. The future you are worried about, the catastrophic scenario, the worst-case outcome, has not happened, and the anxious attention you are directing at it, the energy you are pouring into anticipating and dreading it, is not protecting you from it. It is stealing your presence from the one time and place where you could actually do something meaningful, the present. The Buddha's teaching here has a very specific and practical point. Not only is the past gone and the future not yet here, but the activity of mind-time traveling, the habit of living in the past and future instead of the present, has a cost that we almost never think to calculate. That cost is this: it prevents you from being fully alive to your own life. You are here, this moment, this breath, this experience of being a conscious creature alive on a planet hurtling through space. This is genuinely happening, and you are missing it, not because you are bad or ungrateful or wrong, because you have never been taught how to be here. The practice of mindfulness, at its most essential, is the practice of returning to the present moment, again and again and again, not as a one-time achievement, but as a continuous, gentle, patient returning. The mind drifts. It always drifts. This is its nature. And with kindness rather than frustration, you bring it back to the breath, to the sensation in the body, to the sound of the room, to what is actually here, right now, requiring your attention and presence. What is it like to live fully in the present moment? Most of us have had glimpses. There are certain activities that naturally pull us into presence, moments of flow, when skill and challenge are so perfectly matched that the self-consciousness falls away and there is just the doing. Moments of intense beauty that stop the commentary of the mind. Moments of genuine connection with another person when you are so fully with them that the noise of your own thoughts recedes. Moments of crisis, paradoxically, when the urgency of what is in front of you commands total attention. In all of those moments, what do you notice? There is very often a quality of aliveness, a sharpness and vividness to experience, a sense that this is real, this is what it is to actually be alive. And there is frequently, even in difficult moments, a strange kind of peace, not the peace of everything being okay, but the peace of being fully present with what is. The peace of not adding the weight of past and future to the simple, immediate reality of now. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who spent decades bringing these teachings to Western audiences with extraordinary grace and clarity, had a saying that I want to sit with for a moment. He said, "The present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments." That second part is the part that surprises people. The present moment is the door to all moments, meaning that the way into a genuine understanding of your past and the way into a genuinely wise relationship with your future paradoxically runs through the present. When you are fully here, you can see your past more clearly, with less distortion and less reactivity. When you are fully here, you can make wiser choices about your future because you are not operating from panic or fantasy but from clear-eyed presence. Most of us have the relationship reversed. We believe that thinking endlessly about the past and future is how we make sense of them and prepare for what is to come. But all that thinking, unanchored from the present, produces mostly noise. Rumination about the past, produces depression. Worry about the future produces anxiety. And in the middle of all that noise, the present, the only moment where action is possible, where change is possible, where connection is possible, slips by unattended. There is a moment in every sincere meditation practice when something genuinely surprising happens. You have been watching your breath, bringing your attention back from its wanderings, returning again and again to the simple sensation of air moving through your nostrils and the rise and fall of your chest. And then for a moment, it might be very brief, just a few seconds, the returning becomes the resting, the effort becomes ease. And in that ease, you discover that the present moment is not empty, it is not boring. It is not the featureless background against which the real action of past and future takes place. It is full, it is vivid, it is alive with more texture and richness than the mind's time-traveling ever offers. Because it is real, it is actually happening, and there is nothing, the Buddha found, more extraordinary than what is actually happening. 7. The middle way and the art of liberation. We arrive now at the last lesson, the one that, in many ways, pulls everything together and points toward the path forward. It is the teaching the Buddha called the middle way. And I want to tell you where this teaching came from, because the context makes it far more meaningful than the concept alone. Before the night of his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha Gautama had lived two very different lives. In the first, he was a prince, raised in extraordinary luxury, shielded from suffering, with almost pathological completeness by his well-meaning father. He had every material pleasure, every comfort, every kind of sensory indulgence available to him, and none of it made him happy. None of it answered the question that kept rising in him about the nature of suffering and the meaning of life. The pleasure was real, the enjoyment was real, but it was thin. It did not touch something deep. And so Siddhartha left the palace and went to the other extreme. He became a forest ascetic, practicing the severest forms of self-denial and physical discipline then known in ancient India. He ate almost nothing. He sat in meditation in extreme conditions. He pushed his body to the very edge of what it could endure, and then beyond. For 6 years he lived this way, convinced, as the tradition of his time held, that liberation came through the subjugation of the body, through the dominance of spirit over flesh. He became so emaciated that he could reportedly feel his spine through his stomach when he pressed from the front. And still, liberation did not come. Still, the deep peace he was seeking eluded him. The suffering was different. It was the suffering of extreme denial, rather than the suffering of excess. But it was still suffering. It was still the mind's dissatisfied grasping, now grasping for a spiritual achievement rather than a material one. And then, the story tells us, he remembered something. He remembered a moment from his childhood when he had sat under a rose apple tree and entered naturally into a state of simple, open, peaceful awareness, without effort, without striving, without any kind of self-punishment or self-indulgence, just being fully and completely present. And in the memory of that moment, he recognized something profound. The path was not in either extreme, not in the indulgence of every desire, and not in the brutal suppression of the body and its needs. The path was in between, the middle way. He accepted food from a young woman named Sujata. His 5 ascetic companions, horrified by what they saw as his abandonment of serious practice, left him, and alone, nourished and rested, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and vowed not to move until he understood. That night, the tradition holds, he achieved what the tradition calls nirvana, a word that literally means to blow out, as a flame is blown out, the flame of craving, of aversion, of the suffering that comes from them. Now, what does the middle way mean for you, living your life in the 21st century? Let me be clear about what it does not mean. It does not mean mediocrity. It does not mean doing everything half-heartedly or settling for a moderate version of everything. The middle way is not a call to blandness or passivity. The Buddha's practice under the Bodhi tree, and the practice of every sincere Buddhist who has followed, is anything but passive. It requires extraordinary commitment, extraordinary patience, extraordinary willingness to face yourself honestly. What the middle way means is this: liberation does not live at the extremes. It does not live in the exhausting pursuit of more pleasure, more achievement, more status, more security, and it does not live in harsh self-denial and the punishment of everything natural and human in you. It lives in the intelligent, compassionate, moment-to-moment navigation between the two, in the capacity to enjoy pleasure without being enslaved by it, to endure difficulty without being defeated by it, to rest without collapsing into laziness, to strive without burning yourself up with ambition, to love without losing yourself in attachment, to let go without hardening into indifference. The technical name for this navigation is the Noble Eightfold Path. 8 interrelated dimensions of life and practice that, taken together, constitute the path the Buddha walked and the path he recommended: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Each of these is a vast territory in its own right, but what they share is the quality of the middle way. None of them is extreme in either direction. All of them are characterized by that same quality of intelligent, compassionate balance. And what is the destination of this path? What is liberation, really? Here is where the teaching becomes most humbling and most beautiful simultaneously, because the Buddha's description of nirvana, of liberation, is not a description of a state that has been added to your experience. It is not something extra, some special spiritual condition that comes from outside. It is, rather, the uncovering of what has always been there, beneath the noise of the craving and the aversion, beneath the stories and the self-defense and the compulsive thinking. Beneath all of it, the Buddha found something that could not be disturbed, something that was not affected by what happened on the surface, a quality of awareness and peace that was not contingent on anything external at all. Every authentic spiritual tradition, in its depth, points at this same discovery, that what you are looking for is not elsewhere. It is not in the future, when you have finally achieved enough, learnt enough, healed enough, become enough. It is here, it is now, it has always been here. The entire journey, all the meditation, all the study, all the practice, all the letting go, is not adding something new. It is removing what is in the way, layer by layer, belief by belief, habit by habit, story by story, uncovering what is already whole. This is not a small thing. Do not let the simplicity of it fool you. The layers are thick, the habits are deep, the stories are convincing. The work of uncovering is real work, and it takes time, and it requires support, and there will be moments when you are certain you are going backward. But the direction is clear, and the destination, not a place you arrive at and remain forever, but a quality of being that becomes progressively more available, more stable, more your natural state, is worth everything. The Buddha said, near the end of his life, a thing that I find endlessly moving. He said, work out your own salvation with diligence, not follow my rules, not believe in my teaching, not depend on me for your liberation. Work it out yourself, with diligence, with care, with patience, with the honest, intelligent, compassionate attention that every human being deserves to bring to their one extraordinary life. The 7 lessons we have walked through today are not complete. They are beginnings. Each one of them is a door into a vast territory of practice and experience and discovery. The teaching on suffering opens into the entire inquiry of what suffering is and how it operates. The teaching on non-self opens into a lifetime of exploration of what identity is and what lies beneath it. The teaching on impermanence opens into a completely different relationship with time and loss and love. The teaching on mind opens into the extraordinary science and art of meditation. The teaching on compassion opens into the transformation of every relationship in your life. The teaching on presence opens into the discovery of what it means to actually be alive, and the teaching on the middle way opens into the practical daily navigation of a life lived with wisdom. You do not have to become a monk. You do not have to abandon your life, your relationships, your work. The Buddha taught in the middle of the world, to farmers and merchants and kings and criminals and ordinary people carrying the ordinary weight of ordinary lives. He taught because he genuinely believed, because he had seen, that every human being in their essential nature is already free, already awake, already enough. The work is simply to remember, to return, again and again, with patience and with love, to what you already are. That is the teaching. That has always been the teaching, and it begins, as it always has, with this one breath. Right here, right now. Breathe in and breathe out and begin.